The millionaire CEO escaped to a quiet resort for peace, until three little girls appeared, one with an eye patch, and asked a question that changed everything he thought he knew. Owen Blake didn't take vacations often, and when he did, they were on his terms, private, controlled, and as far from emotional disruption as possible. His life was built on precision, and he liked it that way. He flew first class, stayed in the most discreet five-star hotels, and never engaged in small talk with strangers. When he arrived at the coastal resort that summer, it was not for relaxation, but for silence. The hotel had been selected by his assistant for its privacy and minimal guest traffic. It had a private beach, an exclusive rooftop restaurant, and enough distance from the real world that Owen could exhale without distraction. Or so he thought. The first 2 days were uneventful in the way Owen preferred. He spent the mornings reading reports and the afternoons sitting by the water, untouched by the chaos of emails or public relations. His blonde hair caught the sunlight in neat waves, and his pale blue eyes remained hidden behind dark sunglasses. He didn't smile at anyone, didn't acknowledge greetings from other guests, and rarely spoke unless it was to order something. He was content in his isolation, or at least he believed he was. On the third day, as he sat alone in the rooftop lounge sipping a black espresso, he noticed them. 3 little girls, no older than 6, standing near the edge of the terrace, just far enough to appear unintentional but close enough that he could feel their eyes on him. They weren't running around or screaming like most children would, they were simply watching him. One of them had an eye patch covering her left eye, and it made her presence even more unsettling. She stood between the other two, quieter, somehow more intense. Owen tried to return to his reading, but his focus broke. They were still watching. After another few minutes, they disappeared from view, and Owen let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It wasn't that he disliked children. He simply didn't know what to do with them, what to say, how to act. Children were unpredictable, emotional, messy. Everything he had spent his adult life avoiding. Yet something about those 3 girls lingered in his mind. The one with the patch had eyes he couldn't forget, even though he'd barely seen them. That evening, he descended to the restaurant for dinner, dressed in his usual tailored shirt and gray slacks, perfectly pressed, face unreadable. He took a corner table with a view of the ocean, away from the soft hum of families and couples enjoying sunset cocktails. Halfway through his meal, he noticed them again. The girls were now seated at a table by the far window, unattended. No adult in sight. One of them, the tallest, whispered something to the others, and the girl with the eye patch turned her head slowly toward him. Their eyes locked, and this time, Owen saw it, clear, direct, and unmistakable. Her one visible eye was the same shade of blue as his. He dropped his fork. She stood up and began walking toward him. The other 2 followed. Owen looked around, unsure of what to do. There were no parents, no waitstaff intervening, and no way to pretend he didn't see them. The girl with the patch stopped at the side of his table and tilted her head slightly. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Are you Mr. Owen?" she asked. Her pronunciation was clear, her tone oddly calm for someone so small. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. She nodded too. "Mommy said our eyes look like yours." Behind her, the other girls stood silently, each with the same soft waves of chestnut hair, the same blue eyes, the same quiet intensity. Owen stared at them, stunned, feeling something shift in the air around him. He had built his life on knowing exactly what came next, but in that moment, as 3 girls stood before him, one with a patch, one chewing on her thumb, and one gripping a worn stuffed animal, he realized he had no idea what was about to happen. And for the first time in years, he wasn't sure he wanted to walk away. Owen didn't answer right away. His entire body felt as though it had been frozen in place, his mind attempting to catch up with the reality standing in front of him. These 3 little girls were not just random hotel guests or someone else's children. There was something unsettling and oddly intimate in the way they looked at him, especially the one with the eye patch. She didn't appear afraid or uncertain. If anything, her expression carried a strange familiarity, like she already knew who he was and had simply been waiting for him to admit it. He cleared his throat, unsure what tone to use. "Where's your mother?" he asked, glancing behind them, scanning the restaurant for any adult who might suddenly come claim them. The girl with the patch, Amber, he would soon learn, shrugged. "She left 2 days ago," she said simply. "She said she was going to get medicine but she didn't come back." One of the other girls, slightly smaller, reached up and held Amber's hand. The third was silent, standing close, watching Owen with round, serious eyes. He felt like he had been caught in a dream he couldn't make sense of. The hotel staff hadn't said anything about unaccompanied minors. How had no one noticed? Why hadn't security stepped in? It was absurd. And yet the 3 girls in front of him weren't panicked or distressed. They looked tired, perhaps confused, but not scared. Not even of him. Owen gestured for them to sit at the table, unsure what else to do. The girls climbed into the chairs politely, as if they'd done this before. He signaled for a waiter and ordered food for them without asking preferences: plain pasta, fruit juice, and bread, things he assumed children would eat. As they waited, he tried to organize the questions swirling in his head. The most pressing one: were they really hers? Could they really be Skylar's? "You said your mommy talked about me?" Owen asked, carefully watching Amber. She nodded. "She showed us a picture. She said if anything happened and we ever saw you, we should ask you for help." Owen inhaled deeply, trying to keep his composure. He had not seen Skylar Reed in 6 years. She had vanished from his life without explanation. One day, they had shared a bed, a future, maybe even a love they both refused to name, and the next, she was gone. No letters. No calls. Not even a goodbye. He had searched at first, sent private investigators, pulled every string he had, but all roads led nowhere. Eventually, he had convinced himself she hadn't wanted to be found. But now, sitting across from him were 3 little girls who looked like her. And him. One of them, the quietest, leaned forward and asked, "Do you know how to braid hair?" The question took him so off guard he nearly laughed. "Not really," he admitted, and the girl smiled faintly. "Mommy's good at it. She does ours every morning." A flicker of pain passed through Amber's face. But not this week. Owen couldn't sit still anymore. He stood abruptly, pulling out his phone, excusing himself from the table under the pretense of taking a call. He walked to the far end of the terrace and immediately contacted the hotel manager, demanding to know why 3 young girls were left alone. The manager's voice trembled. He confirmed that yes, a guest named Skylar Reed had checked in with 3 children. She had left in a hurry 2 days ago, asking staff to keep an eye on the girls temporarily. No one had questioned it. She had left no emergency contacts, no return time. Owen ran a hand down his face, suppressing frustration and something heavier: fear. Not fear for himself, but for the girls. If Skylar had truly abandoned them, something had to be terribly wrong. He returned to the table and found them eating quietly. No mess, no complaints. Amber had removed her patch for a moment and was blinking slowly, her eye looking fragile but healing. That same piercing blue stared back at him. "Do you know where Mommy is?" she asked softly. Owen knelt beside her chair. "Not yet," he said, "but I'm going to find her." And in that moment, he knew that promise wasn't casual. It wasn't one of those things adults say to children to calm them down. He meant it. With every fiber of who he was, he intended to find Skylar and bring her back, no matter what it cost. Because whether he wanted to admit it or not, something told him these girls were his. And if they were, then his life had just changed forever. Owen didn't sleep that night. After settling the girls into the sweet 2nd bedroom and ensuring they had everything they needed, extra pillows, nightlights, and a cartoon playing softly in the background, he sat at the edge of his bed, fully clothed, staring at the dim light filtering through the sheer curtains. His thoughts raced, jumping between disbelief, fear, and a deep, unfamiliar urgency. He kept hearing Amber's voice in his head, repeating Skylar's name with such casual familiarity that it made him feel sick to his stomach. If Skylar had sent them to find him, why hadn't she come herself? And if something had gone wrong, why hadn't anyone contacted him? The longer he thought about it, the more he realized how little he really knew about the years Skylar had been gone. For someone who prided himself on always being in control, on always knowing every variable, this situation felt like a storm without warning. The next morning, he was on the phone as soon as the sun rose. He called in favors from his most trusted security team, hired a private investigator, and had Skylar's name entered into hospital and emergency databases within the surrounding region. He provided photographs from years ago, the last ones he had of her, laughing, alive, carefree. He didn't know if they would help, but it was all he had. The investigator, a man named Holden, promised to begin immediately. There was something in Owen's voice that brokered no delay. After the calls, Owen turned his attention back to the girls. When he walked into the kitchen, he found them quietly seated at the breakfast bar. Someone had helped them toast bread and pour juice, probably room service. Emily, the most talkative of the three, was explaining something to Eloise in a serious tone about how to tell twins apart, even if you were a twin. Amber, meanwhile, sat with her bunny in her lap, eye patch back in place, watching him. He offered a gentle good morning, uncertain of his own voice. They responded politely, as if they'd already decided he was someone they could trust. That thought shook him more than he expected. After a few minutes, Emily asked where their mother was, her voice small but steady. Owen knelt beside them and answered with as much honesty as he could manage. "I don't know yet. But I'm doing everything I can to find her." None of them cried, not even Amber. Instead, they simply nodded and returned to their food, as though this answer was what they'd expected all along. That afternoon, Owen went down to the hotel reception and demanded to see security footage. It took some convincing, and a quiet mention of his legal team, but eventually the manager obliged. Together they watched the footage from the day Skylar had left. The images showed her walking out of the hotel lobby alone, wearing sunglasses and a light jacket, her expression tense but calm. She had spoken to no one, gotten into a taxi, and vanished into the city. Owen froze the screen and stared at her face. Even through the grainy footage, he could see something in her eyes, something urgent. She hadn't abandoned the girls. He felt it in his gut. Something had happened to her after she left. Holden called that evening with a lead. A Jane Doe had been admitted to a small hospital about 30 minutes away the day after Skylar vanished. No ID, no memory, and no family contact. She had been found on the roadside after a car accident, concussed and disoriented, and she matched Skylar's physical description almost exactly. The hospital hadn't been able to identify her, and she'd remained under observation. Owen's heart pounded as Holden gave him the details. There was no definitive confirmation yet, but it was the first real lead he had. He didn't wait. He told the girls they'd be going for a ride, helped them into clean clothes, and called for a private driver. The ride to the hospital was quiet. The girls looked out the windows, asking occasional questions about where they were going, and Owen answered softly, reassuringly. When they arrived, he told them to wait with a nurse in the children's wing while he checked in. As he walked through the sterile halls, his footsteps echoing, he felt more unsteady than he ever had in a boardroom. When the nurse led him to the recovery room, his breath caught before he even stepped through the door. There she was. Skylar was sitting upright in the bed, staring blankly out the window, her hair tied back, bruises along her arms and cheek. Her eyes didn't light up when she saw him, there was no recognition. She simply blinked and tilted her head. The nurse explained gently that she still couldn't remember her name or anything that had happened prior to the accident. But Owen knew. He didn't need confirmation. He stood frozen in the doorway, and for the first time in years, he was afraid of what would come next. Because this woman, who once held his heart in the palm of her hand, now looked at him like a stranger. And he wasn't sure if love alone could bridge that kind of distance. Owen stood in the doorway for several seconds, silently studying the woman lying in the hospital bed. The bruises on her arms looked fresh, the four in her hand was slowly dripping, and her posture, while upright, appeared wary. She didn't flinch at the sight of him, but she didn't smile either. Her blue eyes met his with blank politeness, the kind strangers give each other in passing, not the look of a woman who once whispered secrets into his ear or bore 3 children with his eyes. It was Skylar. There was no question in his mind. But the Skylar he had known was gone, at least for now. She had always been full of life, strong-willed, sharp-eyed. Now she looked like a sketch of herself, faded, quiet, unsure of the world around her. The nurse gently explained that the woman had suffered a concussion and possibly mild brain trauma. She had been found on the side of a road, dazed and disoriented, wearing clothing that had been partially torn, without any wallet, phone, or form of ID. She had been calling herself Sasha, a name that made no sense to anyone, and when questioned further, she simply repeated that she was trying to get back. But she couldn't say to where, or to whom. She had no recollection of her real name, her family, or any part of her past. Owen listened in silence, barely breathing. The air around him felt thick with the weight of this moment. He stepped inside slowly, nodding to the nurse to give them a few minutes alone. When he approached her bedside, she watched him calmly, curiously. "Do I know you?" she asked in a soft, almost apologetic voice. It took everything in Owen not to react. He sat beside her slowly and studied her face, the curve of her jaw, the tiny freckle near her left eyebrow, the scar on her wrist he remembered from a biking accident years ago. "Yes," he said quietly. "You do." She tilted her head, a crease forming between her brows. "Are you my doctor?" He shook his head. "No. My name is Owen Blake. We used to be close. A long time ago." She didn't respond right away, only nodded as if accepting the information even though it meant nothing to her. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice tinged with guilt. "I wish I could remember." Owen forced a smile, though it felt brittle. "It's okay. You've been through something serious. The memory loss might be temporary." There was a long pause, thick with things unsaid. He wanted to tell her everything. About the girls. About Amber and her patch, about the hotel and the photo and the years of silence. But he couldn't unload it all in one breath. She was fragile, too far from the woman he remembered to handle the storm he carried. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. It was the same one the girls had carried, him and Skylar at the beach, smiling in the sunlight, her hair tangled by wind, his arm around her shoulders. He placed it gently on the table beside her. She leaned over to look at it, her fingers brushing the edge. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes lingered. "That's me?" she asked, almost in disbelief. "Yes," he said. "That's you. And me. A few years ago." She looked between the photo and his face several times, as if willing the connection to spark something. "I look happy," she murmured. "You were," he replied, and then added, "You are. You just don't remember yet." He didn't know how long he stayed there, but eventually the nurse returned to check her vitals and reminded him gently that visiting hours would end soon. He nodded and stood, unsure what to do next. As he turned to leave, Skylar called out softly, "Will you come back?" Owen paused at the door. "Of course," he said. "Every day." When he returned to the hotel later that evening, the girls were asleep. Amber clutched her bunny with one arm and her sister's hand with the other. He sat quietly at the edge of the bed and looked at them, at their matching features and soft breathing. He realized how close they had come to losing her completely. And how far they still had to go. Skylar was alive, yes, but the road back to who she was would be long and uncertain. That night, Owen didn't sleep again. He stayed by the window, watching the stars, wondering how you help someone remember the love they forgot. And if it was possible to make them fall in love with you all over again. The following morning, Owen left the hotel before sunrise. He didn't wake the girls, though he quietly peeked in on them, noting how they'd shifted positions in their sleep, tangled in the sheets like small animals nesting together. He gently pulled the blanket back over Emily's shoulder and paused for a long moment to look at Amber, her patch askew, her breathing slow and even. He still couldn't understand how Skylar had managed to raise 3 children alone for 6 years. It was a quiet kind of strength, one that had gone unseen until now, and it both awed and unsettled him. He wasn't sure he'd ever known her, not fully, not if she had carried this burden in silence. At the hospital, Skylar looked slightly more alert, sitting up straighter, her hair freshly brushed. A nurse said she'd remembered the name of a song that morning, a random lullaby. When Owen entered the room, she looked up and smiled faintly. That was new. He smiled back and sat beside her. "Any luck with your memory?" he asked gently, and she shook her head. "Not really. But the doctor said fragments might come back." He hesitated, then reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and took out a thin envelope. Inside were 3 photographs, the girls, each one smiling. Emily was holding a painted rock. Eloise had jelly on her cheek. Amber was looking directly into the camera, serious, her one visible blue eye wide and bright. Skylar took the photos with trembling fingers. For a long time, she said nothing. She touched each one like it might dissolve beneath her hand. Then her mouth opened slightly. "They look like me," she whispered. "And one of them, her eye," Owen nodded. "That's Amber. She had surgery recently. She's healing well." Skylar's expression changed, flickering between awe and fear. "Are they mine?" she asked, almost too afraid to hear the answer. "Yes," Owen said quietly. "They're your daughters. All 3 of them. You named them Emily, Eloise, and Amber." The silence between them deepened, but not in the way it had before. Now it was full of something alive, grief, perhaps, or guilt, or the desperate beginning of memory. "I didn't know," she murmured. I knew I had lost something. But I didn't know it was them." Owen nodded slowly, his voice low. "They've been looking for you. They think you just went to get medicine. They've been so brave, Skylar. They're smart and funny and, you did such a good job." She looked at him then with glassy eyes. "I don't remember any of it. But when I saw her picture, Amber, I felt something. It was like my chest hurt, but in a good way." "Is that normal?" "Yes," Owen said, swallowing hard. "That's love. Even if your mind doesn't remember them yet, your heart does." For the rest of the visit, they spoke in quiet tones. He told her small stories, how Emily argued like a lawyer, how Eloise made up her own words, how Amber never spoke unless she really meant something. Skylar listened like someone desperately collecting fragments of herself, trying to rebuild from the ground up. When visiting hours ended, she touched his arm as he stood. "Can you bring them?" she asked. "Not all at once. Maybe just one. I think I want to see them." Her voice cracked. "If they're mine, I need to know it's real." That evening, back at the hotel, Owen sat with the girls after dinner. The sky outside was painted with streaks of deep pink and orange, and the sound of waves echoed faintly through the open balcony doors. He waited until the dishes were cleared and bedtime was close before speaking. "I saw your mom today," he said softly. The room froze. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward him at once. "She's okay. She's at a hospital. She doesn't remember everything yet, but she's getting stronger." "And, she asked about you." Amber sat perfectly still, clutching her bunny to her chest. "Does she know who we are?" Owen hesitated, then answered truthfully. "Not completely. But she's starting to." She saw your pictures. And she felt something. I think her heart remembers, even if her head doesn't. The girls were quiet for a long time, processing in the way only children can. Then Emily asked, "Can we see her?" Owen smiled gently. "Soon. One at a time. She wants to take it slow. She wants to do it right." Later that night, after the girls were asleep, Owen stood alone on the balcony. The air was cool, the wind soft. He held the photo of the girls in one hand and Skylar's earlier smile in his memory. He had come to this hotel to escape noise, chaos, and unpredictability. And now he had 3 daughters, one woman with missing memories, and more emotion than he'd allowed himself to feel in a decade. He wasn't sure where this path would lead, but he knew one thing with clarity: he wasn't going to run from it. Not anymore. The next morning, Owen woke before sunrise, not because of stress or responsibility, but because of anticipation. There was a fragile sense of hope forming inside him that he couldn't ignore, and it had everything to do with what Skylar had asked the day before. She wanted to see one of the girls. It was a small step, but for Owen it felt like a doorway had opened. The idea that she might begin to remember them, even if slowly, even if painfully, was enough to keep him moving forward with more purpose than he'd felt in years. He knew this process wasn't going to be simple. Memory wasn't something you could force back into someone's mind. But feelings were stronger than facts, and if Skylar felt something when she saw the girls, that was where everything could begin again. He carefully selected Amber to be the first. Not because she was his favorite, he couldn't imagine ever choosing between them, but because there was something about Amber's calmness, her intuition, that mirrored Skylar in a way the others didn't. And more than that, Amber had a quiet connection to pain that Owen sensed would make the visit easier, softer. She was also the one who had first approached him at the restaurant. It felt fitting that she be the one to step forward again. When he gently asked her that morning if she wanted to see her mom, Amber didn't ask a single question. She simply nodded and went to find her shoes. The drive to the hospital was quiet, but not in an uncomfortable way. Owen glanced at her through the mirror a few times and saw that her hands were steady in her lap, her bunny clutched loosely but not tensely. When they arrived, he picked her up as they walked through the halls, not because she asked, but because she reached for him without words. And in that gesture, something inside Owen settled. It was the kind of trust he never thought he would be given. At the door to Skylar's room, Owen paused and knelt beside Amber. "She might not remember everything," he said softly. "But she knows you're important. She's trying." Amber nodded. "It's okay. I remember for both of us." That simple sentence nearly broke him. He took her hand and led her in. Skylar was sitting in a chair by the window, dressed in a hospital robe, her hair braided loosely over one shoulder by a kind nurse who'd taken extra time that morning. She looked up as they entered, her eyes immediately locking onto Amber. For a moment, no one moved. Then, Skylar slowly stood, her hand gripping the windowsill behind her for balance. Amber didn't run to her. She simply walked forward until she stood in front of her mother, then reached out and placed her bunny into Skylar's hands. Skylar's fingers closed around it automatically. She stared at it, then down at Amber. "You're Amber?" she asked, her voice cracking. Amber nodded once. Skylar's other hand trembled as she reached up and touched the edge of the child's eye patch, not to remove it, but to acknowledge it. "You had surgery," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Yes," Amber replied, her voice gentle. "You took me." Skylar's face crumpled. It wasn't a memory, not yet, but it was a piece of emotion breaking through. She knelt carefully, her hands hovering near Amber's shoulders, unsure if she was allowed to hold her. Amber made the choice for her. She leaned in and wrapped her small arms around Skylar's neck. Skylar pulled her close, burying her face into her daughter's shoulder as her body began to shake. She cried silently, and Amber held her with the patience of someone far older than 6. Owen turned away for a moment to let them have it. He'd seen 1,000 deals close, watched empires rise and fall, but nothing compared to this, watching someone remember how to love the thing they once created. They stayed at the hospital for another hour. Skylar didn't want to let Amber go, even though she still didn't remember much. She asked questions, about the girls' birthdays, their favorite colors, their habits, and Amber answered each one with careful detail, as if giving her mother a crash course on the life they'd lived without her. By the time it was time to leave, Skylar was holding Amber's hand like she'd always done it. Before they exited the room, Amber looked back and said, "You don't have to remember everything all at once. I can tell you stories." When they returned to the hotel, Amber said very little to her sisters. She simply handed them each a piece of candy Skylar had saved from her hospital tray and then curled up on the couch. Owen watched her, realizing she wasn't withdrawing, she was processing. And he gave her the space to do so. Later that night, when the girls were asleep, Amber whispered as he tucked her in, "She's still in there." She didn't forget how to feel. Just how to say it. He kissed her forehead and felt more hope than fear for the first time in a long while. He sat alone for a while after that, watching the moonlight pour in through the window. Skylar was still finding her way back, but she wasn't lost. Not anymore. And neither was he. 2 days after Amber's visit, Owen sat in the hospital cafeteria with 2 cups of coffee in front of him and a folded drawing in his hand. It was one of Eloise's, a sketch of their family with stick figures and big blue eyes, with a son smiling in the corner and their mother drawn with long brown hair and a bright pink dress. Eloise had insisted that Owen give it to Skylar, so she doesn't forget what we look like anymore. He'd told her Skylar was doing better, and she was, slowly. After Amber's visit, Skylar had asked for more pictures, more stories. She had begun keeping a small notebook, writing down names and moments as she learned them, almost like she was studying her own life from the outside. She still didn't remember events in any complete way, but when she looked at Amber's bunny now, her fingers moved over it like a mother's would. She had even whispered to it once, not knowing Owen had heard. Today, Skylar would meet both Emily and Eloise. The hospital had arranged a private lounge space for them to spend time together, less sterile and more comfortable than a hospital room. Owen had prepared the girls carefully that morning. He'd explained, once again, that their mother might not remember everything, but she was trying. Emily had nodded solemnly, taking it as a mission. Eloise had clung to Owen's shirt for a moment, then let go with quiet bravery. As the driver pulled into the hospital's circular driveway, Owen looked back and saw the girls holding hands in the back seat, their small faces set with purpose, not fear. He didn't know how he'd gotten so lucky with them, how they were so strong, so open-hearted, after everything. Inside, the meeting room was filled with morning light. Skylar was already seated on a soft couch, wearing a pale sweater and loose jeans, her hands folded nervously in her lap. Her hair had been brushed into a braid again, and her face looked less pale than it had a week ago. When the girls walked in, everything seemed to stop for a moment. Emily saw her first and didn't hesitate. She walked straight over and said, "You don't look like the picture in my head, but I think you smell the same." Skylar blinked, and then laughed, the sound surprising even herself. "That's probably a good thing," she said gently. "I hope that's a nice memory." Emily nodded. "It is." Eloise was slower, cautious. She hung back until Emily took her hand and tugged her forward. Skylar reached out her arms without thinking, and to Owen's astonishment, Eloise walked into them. Skylar held her tightly, closing her eyes, breathing her in. "You used to sleep on my chest," she murmured, then stopped. Her eyes opened wide. "I remember that. She had colic. I used to hum to her at night." The room went completely still. Owen, standing near the door, didn't speak, didn't even move. Skylar looked up at him, eyes wide and watery. "I remember something," she said. "Just a piece. I don't know where it came from, but it was real. It felt real. Emily looked at her sister and whispered, "She remembers you," and Eloise smiled so wide her eyes crinkled. They spent over an hour together, sharing snacks, drawing with crayons on a hospital tray, telling stories. Emily told Schuyler about a time they had built a blanket fort and pretended it was a spaceship. Eloise recited part of a poem she had learned. Schuyler listened to every word like it was gold. Occasionally, she would repeat one of the girl's phrases under her breath, trying to hold on to them, like slipping threads she could grasp only if she didn't blink. When the nurse came in to say visiting time was over, none of them wanted to leave. Schuyler stood and hugged them both, holding Emily tightly, her lips near her ear. "You are so brave," she said. "You remind me of who I used to be." On the way back to the hotel, Owen didn't say much. The girls didn't either, but their silence wasn't heavy. It was thoughtful, almost peaceful. That night, as he tucked them in, Emily asked if they could visit Schuyler again soon. Owen smiled and said, "Yes. She wants that too." Then she asked something that caught him off guard. "Do you think she'll come live with us again?" Owen hesitated. "I don't know. But we're giving her every reason to want to." Emily nodded as if that was enough. Later, Owen called the hospital and asked to speak to Schuyler. She answered slowly, her voice soft with fatigue but clearer than before. "I don't know how to do this," she said honestly. "I don't know how to be their mother again when I feel like a stranger to myself." Owen sat down on the balcony, his phone pressed to his ear. "You already are," he said. "You were the second you held them. They don't care that you don't remember everything. They love you anyway. And I do too." There was a pause, long and full of meaning. "You do?" she asked. He exhaled. "Still. Always." He didn't expect her to say it back. Not yet. But her silence felt like a promise. And for now, that was more than enough. The day Schuyler was discharged from the hospital, the weather was warm and unusually still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Owen arrived early, carrying a small bag of clothes the girls had helped him pack, a soft cotton dress, a cardigan, and the necklace Schuyler used to wear, the one with the tiny silver leaf she'd once told him reminded her of balance. He watched through the glass doors as she walked slowly down the hallway with the help of a nurse, her step steady but careful, her expression caught somewhere between apprehension and quiet courage. It had been nearly 3 weeks since the accident, and though her memory was still incomplete, fragmented in places, Schuyler had decided she was ready to leave the sterile comfort of the hospital behind and try to come home, whatever home now meant. Owen had prepared everything with obsessive care. He'd rented a small beach house not far from the hotel, a temporary home full of light and open windows and childproof corners. He wanted Schuyler to have space to breathe, to remember, to exist without pressure, but he also wanted the girls to be close. That morning, before leaving to pick her up, he had sat all 3 of them down and explained gently that their mom would be living nearby for a while. Not in the hotel room, not in a hospital bed, but in a real home they could visit every day. Amber had asked, "Can we have dinner together again?" and Owen had promised yes, soon. He had never seen a child look so relieved. When Schuyler stepped out of the hospital doors and into the sunlight, she paused and tilted her face toward the sky. Her hand instinctively reached for Owen's, and he took it without hesitation. They didn't speak on the drive to the beach house, but the silence wasn't heavy. It was full of quiet things, understanding, questions that didn't need to be asked, and something softer building between them again, something like trust. When they pulled into the driveway, she stared at the little house for a long moment. "It's perfect," she said finally. "I don't know why, but it feels safe." The girls were waiting inside. They had drawn signs in crayon that said, "Welcome home, Mom," and "We missed you every day." Schuyler saw them the moment she stepped through the door, and her breath hitched. Amber stood first, walking over with her bunny and holding it up like a gift. "You forgot a lot," she said gently. "But you didn't forget how to hug us." Skylar knelt and opened her arms. The three girls piled into them without hesitation, and she held them all, her head bent low into their shoulders. No one cried. Not even Skylar. But the room was full of something deeper than tears: reunion, recognition, the unspoken truth that what was broken could be built again. The following days were slow, tender, sometimes clumsy. Skylar would forget details and get overwhelmed, but the girls never once made her feel like she failed. They told her stories from their point of view, corrected each other in giggles, and made her laugh in ways she hadn't in years. Every night, she sat on the porch with Owen after the girls were asleep, sipping tea, trying to piece together the missing parts of herself. Sometimes she'd remember fragments: a lullaby, the feel of a baby's breath on her chest, the color of the hospital room when Amber was born. Other times, she didn't remember at all, but she learned to live with the gaps. Owen was patient. He didn't push or demand. He was just there, steady and present, the anchor she hadn't realized she'd needed. One evening, as they watched the girls chase fireflies in the backyard, Skylar looked over at him and asked quietly, "How did you forgive me for leaving?" Owen didn't look away from the sky when he answered. "I didn't understand it for a long time. I was angry. But when I saw them, when I saw you again, I realized it didn't matter. You did what you thought was right. And in the end, you came back." By the end of the first week, the girls started calling her Mommy again without being prompted. It came naturally, like breath. Skylar still hesitated when they said it, her heart tugging between awe and disbelief. But each time, she answered. On the 10th day, as they sat around the dinner table eating pancakes for dinner because Eloise had begged for it, Skylar looked up and said, "I remember this. Not the pancakes. But this feeling." The girls paused, listening. She reached across the table and took Owen's hand. "This is the first moment that feels like mine." That night, after the girls were asleep, Owen stood at the door to her room and asked, "Do you want me to stay?" Skylar looked up at him from the bed, her face lit only by the soft glow of a bedside lamp. She didn't answer with words. She simply pulled back the blanket and moved to one side. He joined her without hesitation, not because it was what he had wanted for so long, but because it felt right. Real. They didn't speak, didn't touch more than their hands finding each other between the sheets. But that quiet connection, bare and human and honest, was more intimate than anything they'd shared before. In the morning, they woke to sunlight and the sound of giggles down the hallway. Skylar rolled onto her side and whispered, "I think I'm falling in love with you again." Owen smiled without opening his eyes. "Then I guess I'll have to keep earning it." And for once in his life, he didn't need a plan. He had everything he needed right there, in that house full of memory, hope, and second chances.